All right, so welcome back to Food Chain Wars. Today, Blaine, we're going to talk about basically 5 really high leverage ways that you can increase your margin. We're going to give examples of those. These are really just things that we've learned in our experience that have been game changer for us because there's a lot of work that goes into being in the farm to fork industry, especially if you're vertically integrated and you have the farm. So you're having to raise animals, you're having to get them processed, you're having to go acquire a customer, do all the fulfillment, shipping, customer service. I mean, just tons of stuff. And the cool thing is that what we're going to share today is that we're going to share 5 ways for you to basically increase margin and therefore, money that stays with you in your pocket. And these are going to be things that you mostly only have to do like once. They're not things that require you to, well, for every animal I sell, I have to now do a little bit more work to get more margin. Like that's what you do when you climb the value chain. You do a little bit more work, you do all this stuff, and now you capture more margin. But we're going to show you how to get even more just by doing certain things one time. And then it's always working for you while you're sleeping, which that's the most valuable work you can be doing in any business, is stuff that's just going to pay back return after return.
And these are things, Brooks, that we're constantly reviewing and going back to, and that our team is even reminding us of as well. So it's always valuable to go through these things. You might be listening, thinking, "Well, I think I've done a good job here, or I've thoroughly analyzed this, and there's nothing more I can do." And there's always more you can do. Sometimes a complete breakthrough just by reviewing these again.
So if you like to make money in your sleep, you're going to want to listen to this episode, and hopefully that has you hooked into what we're about to talk about.
And that's a good thing. We're talking about breakthroughs, Brooks, because we've been asked by just people outside of our business, why don't you get into processing? Surely there's some extra margin there. And there is. And for every pound to gain that extra margin, we would have to do something ongoing.
For every pound.
Yes.
That's
so we're not talking about that.
Yeah, these are not ongoing things. So, but first, before we get into that, Blaine, just for anyone who's listening for the first time, they're not familiar with us, Food Chain Wars. So my name's Brooks Hitzfield. It's my brother Blaine, co-host here of the show. We feel like farm to fork, direct marketing is the one thing that we kind of know in business, then have a lot of experience in, more than most people. We've got Seven Sons Farms, which is an 8-figure farm to fork direct marketing e-commerce brand. That's still growing. It has high growth rates. We've had experience developing software, Graze Cart platform, e-commerce software for farm to fork providers. So what we try to do in this show is just unpack lessons that we've learned through our network, connecting with other farms who are doing this, and obviously the experience that we're gaining here at Seven Sons. So if you're new to the show, be sure to subscribe. And if that sounds interesting to you, we drop more episodes like this all the time. So with that said, Blaine, let's get into the episode. But to make sure that we're on the same page and speaking the same language as anyone listening, go ahead and just start with the basics. Let's talk about what is product margin. So that way we get the definitions right before we go into talking about how do we increase this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very simple. You have your price that you sell your product for to your customer, and then you have input cost that you have to deduct from that price. What's left is margin or margin percentage, which you're just dividing your cost divided by or the difference of your margin divided by your final price to get your margin percentage. So did that make sense?
That was for the margin percentage, but just tell me again real quick. Do
you want to know the input cost?
Yeah, give an example for us. And inputs, we kind of describe those as what we track in our inputs are going to be things that, again, it's work or it's cost that goes into every pound of product that's sold.
Because cost of goods then. So either we have to raise the animal or someone else does, and we pay them on a per pound basis. So that's cost of goods. So that's one of the first things that comes off of the sale price. And then looking at my notes here, we've got processing cost, shipping cost, which for us, we're 100% home delivery. So that's a big component.
Those are our carriers, UPS, FedEx.
Yes. Dry ice that goes in the box, the insulated box.
But if we were doing our own deliveries, that's something that it might be hard. But again, we're just trying to look at the logistics side. It goes into every pound. So if you can, carve out that cost into your inputs, that's ideal.
Yeah, and then I think we track credit card processing cost on every transaction, and that makes up pretty much the bulk of our input cost. So we total those all up. I think we come to $6-7 somewhere in there. It's constantly changing.
Per pound, you're saying?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So simple terms, basically your retail price minus the costs that go in to get that product into the hands of the customer. And whatever's left, that's going to be your margin. If you want to look at a percentage, you can use the formula Blaine mentioned before.
That's what you have left. Then go cover your overheads, and then have something left after that. So,
All right, well, let's get into the example. It's talking about 5 ways to now increase margin. So to make sure that we have more left to cover our overheads and to add to the bottom line. What's the first example that you want to start with?
Well, we are constantly always evaluating our average order size. So this is really important to us. You may not think of this as, oh, this is a big driver of margin, but it really is when you're in the home delivery business and you have these input costs like shipping in a box, the dry ice that goes in the box. We need to be able to leverage those the best we can. The better we can leverage that. So the more product that we put in that box, our ratio of cost of delivery, packaging, dry ice, we're just much more efficient when that order size goes up, which creates a very substantial impact on margin. So that's number one, or just the first one we're going to share. We're always looking at that.
This is similar to just the, it's, I guess, microeconomics examples of like, okay, obviously, in a business, you've got your margin, you got your input costs, and what's left, you're trying to spread out over your overheads. Well, that's happening in a small way too. Once you get into the world of shipping, that happens all over again, and just in a smaller level, because you've got like certain amount of, I call them overheads that go into a box.
It's a micro overhead.
Yeah,
scenario.
micro overhead that go into a box to get it out the door and delivered to your customers. You've got the packaging and the insulation. You've got the dry ice. And the reason why I call them micro overheads and not inputs, because you can actually scale those out. So for every pound that I add to the box, that does not increase my packaging and shipping costs to the same degree or the same, increased rate. Yeah. So, if you're getting $200, $250 inside the box, you're spreading out the cost in that box a lot further. This does have its limits. If you've been in the shipping world for long, a lot of carriers only let you ship boxes of up to, I think, 40 pounds before they give you another surcharge. But there's a window in there where you're trying to get people as close to that as possible.
There's a sweet spot that you want to try to hit, and that definitely will help margin. And Brooks, ways to do that. I mean, this sounds too simple, but we see time and time again, and even ourselves, we waited too long to do this, but just implementing an order minimum, especially if you're in the shipping business, is an absolute must. And it's that you do one thing and it changes, it affects every order from there on.
I would say this is one of the biggest mistakes that I feel like ends up happening. I mean, we've done it before too. When you get into home delivery or shipping, especially if you were originally selling to customers at farmers markets, or maybe you're doing pickup locations, something like that, where the minimum doesn't really matter as much.
Yeah.
You just want people to buy your product, right?
Yeah.
And then you start crossing this divide into home delivery and shipping. You don't want it. You feel like that, if I add a minimum, I'm forcing all my new customers into that, or my existing customers into that minimum, where that's not always the case. You're really just forcing people into a minimum if they want to support this new service that you've added that just has new components to it. If you explain that to your customers, generally they're going to end up getting it, and it makes a huge difference, because those small orders, I mean, absolutely, there's a certain order size, depending on what your pricing set up, where you're going to be breaking even or losing money.
Yeah. And so our order minimum, I think, is at $75 at a minimum. And that's literally a minimum that we need for the amount of thermodynamics that we want in that box of
to keep
product.
everything frozen. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But our average order size is I think
over $200.
Over
213.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like even if today, if we increased our minimum order, Brooks, from 80 or from 75 to 85, we would ultimately see an effect on the average order size. Yep. There's a direct correlation, obviously, between those things. Other things that we look for is increasing the category selections that we have. So if you're out there and maybe you're just in the beef business and that's all you're offering on your website, I mean, kudos to you. That's a very focused business. But when it comes to increasing that order size, definitely adding, expanding your selection will definitely help.
Well, and I would say this is a must if you're selling anything other than beef, is like your flagship product. So if you're just selling poultry or just pork and you think you can grow a direct marketing business on just those categories, it's just a tough sell to find a customer who's just looking for a farm to buy their pork from. So it doesn't mean you have to go raise it, start buying beef from somebody else who shares your values for agriculture, and make that available to your customers as well, because it'll make a huge difference on those microeconomics when it comes to orders going out the door.
Something else we've gotten better on is aligning our bulk incentives with where we want how to influence the order size based on the bulk incentives. For example, we used to have a lot of bundles around $99 that were a great deal. And it just finally dawned on us one day, why do we have those incentives for someone to buy a $99 bulk bundle? Let's put those closer to upwards of $200 to $300 for bulk ones. So we come out with our beef staples box that starts pushing that. So
Yeah, and I like that versus the order minimum. Order minimum has to be there for the thermodynamics and other reasons, but it's always nice to just incentivize the behavior you want.
Yeah,
you can do that through bundles.
kind of a push and pull, and you want to do both really at both ends. So that's number one. Free delivery threshold can also be a tool to get order minimum up. You have to be careful because if you make that free delivery threshold too large, if you lean on that too heavily, you can kind of have a barrier for brand new customers that may not want to pay a delivery fee but don't want to get up to, say, for an example, a $250 order minimum for free delivery. In our mind, that's pushing it for a customer if you're a growth-minded business.
Yeah, I think the only exception is that maybe that I've seen enough of that you can get away with it a little bit more is if you're just retailing something like bison, where it's a really high-cost product, and again, you're trying to get a certain amount of pounds inside the box. It's a little bit of a different story, but anything outside of that, $150 to $200, I think is palatable.
Yeah. Yep. So move on. Tip number 2.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorites when I used to do the merchandising and actually cutting up the carcasses and working with the processor is increasing perceived value. And the value that we can extract from each carcass that we process. So, we've over time at Seven Sons, we've developed lines of premium products, and the two examples that I go to is our gourmet ground beef. So, being in the retail business, we in shipping, we never had a great demand for our brisket, for example. We haven't always done much with our short rib, and I was browsing on another competitor's website. It's one of the big shippers out there, companies, and they were selling this gourmet ground beef product, and it was just a blend of brisket, short rib, and chuck. And well, we can do that. And the important thing is when you do something special like that, is to make sure you raise the price on that item. So we have our regular ground beef.
If there's any extra work involved for you or your processor.
Yeah,
absolutely, to capture that work that is involved. And there's always extra work involved in just adding a new SKU, even if there's not
the complexity.
More cost. You add another item, that's another item you have to manage in your freezer to make sure you keep inventory available for it. So absolutely, you do creative stuff, especially if it's got a wow factor to it. Yeah. There's a willingness to pay for that.
Yeah, and it was an experiment. I mean, we really didn't know if there was a willingness to pay for it. We just thought if we're going to do it, let's try it. It's worth it. You can actually, I forget how many pounds. There's quite a few pounds of gourmet ground beef that we can get from each carcass. And so we tried it, and sure enough, even though we were selling it for, I think at the time we started off pretty steep, like $2 or $3 a pound above regular ground beef.
Well, introducing a new product is the best time to get the pricing right.
Yes.
Get it right up front, because you can always, if you feel like you need to lower it to move more of pounds if you need to, and that helps with balancing the carcass, you can always do that. But start high, and then it's customers will always receive that discount far better than you having to go and correct these things down the road.
So that's just one example. I mean, your creativity is the limit to this. Looking at other websites is a great way to to find ideas. The other one I say is baconize at every opportunity. So where can you incorporate bacon into your offering? It's an all-star product when people hear that term bacon. So one thing that we did is our processor was able to do this for us, but we took our pork shoulders and this is another example of making bacon, but we would make cottage bacon, which is basically smoked pork shoulder sliced. And we don't sell all the cottage bacon that we could get from the hogs that we process. So we went ahead and used that same cut, smoked, and incorporated it into our ground beef. So we come up with this bacon-infused beef patties product. And that has been, it's a great seller for us. And there's where we're taking two low-value products, pork shoulder and ground beef, combining it together just for a fun offering that, again, we charge quite a premium for, and it sells very well. So just another opportunity to increase that margin.
I'm sure people listening to this part of the episode, Blaine, are just thinking like, okay, well, you need a processor to do this stuff,
Yep.
which is true. So that's not the topic of this episode, but picking your processing partner is absolutely critical and one of the most important partnerships in this business.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure we've got some podcasts on that, so go back and look through when it comes to choosing your processing partner, because it's worth traveling a little bit further to find the right partner.
Well, that's the number one mistake we find farms make with processing decisions is always choosing the one that's kind of the closest and not being willing to travel a little bit, even sometimes quite a bit further. It can make or break your business. So
let's keep rolling. What's number 3?
Yeah, next one is similar. It's merchandising. So it's like, okay, once you've taken the time, this is kind of like a layered process. When you've taken the time to get those specialty products, those higher margin products like the gourmet ground beef, the bacon infused patties, maybe some extra special steaks, now incorporating those into your merchandising plan. And when I say merchandising, I'm really talking about bundles. So building those, because what you'll find at first is maybe some of your customers aren't buying those items. But what you can do is include them in your bundles. So we always merchandise our bundles with bacon infused patties, if it's a beef bundle, bacon infused patties, and gourmet ground beef, because that brings the perceived or the retail value of that box up. And now that you've included those higher value items, now you can afford to offer a more a discount on that bundle, because you've just built perceived value into your bundle. Now you can give a little bit more away in a discount.
Well, and a key and really important component to this of what we're talking about is when you offer a bundle for a discount, make sure you tell your customers, you show and display to them what would it originally cost at retail value to buy all these items in a bundle, and what kind of discount am I getting. You got to make sure, find the right software and technology, make sure that you can display that to your customer, because they're not going to go to the work to figure out, how much savings have you provided in this bundle. And if you make them do that, you're going to see that, you're just not going to convert as many people on that type of product.
Yeah, taking time, building those spreadsheets to merchandise those bundles. There are all kinds of not only ways to make your bundles more appealing and compelling, but also ways to strategically add value and discounts for your customers for buying that bundle, all in the same package.
Yeah. So anything else to share on remerchandising before we move on?
This is outside of, this includes bundles or just regular SKUs. Something that we try to practice every year is we go through all of our SKUs, all of our bundles, and we say, are there just any slow moving or lower margin cuts or items that we're selling that, we'd rather our customers spend money on items that we make more margin from. It's very simple, but we constantly, it's the 80-20 rule.
You always capture, some more focus, reduce a little bit of complexity for every SKU that you eliminate. That just isn't pulling its weight from a margin perspective or a sales perspective. I can see where a lot of times, especially if you're earlier on in your journey, you're really close to talking to your customers and doing the customer service. It can make these decisions harder because customers by name who love to buy that one SKU, but they're pretty much, them and a handful of others, and that's about it. And it's not pulling its weight from a margin perspective. If you cut that stuff, go through once a year, do this exercise, cut that stuff, you'll be amazed by the amount of just complexity that you have freed up in your business by reducing the amount of SKUs. The only exception to this, I would say, outlier, is if you have an item that doesn't get a lot of, maybe doesn't pull a lot of margin weight, but is unique enough that you're getting a lot of organic search traffic. People are finding you because they can't find this product anywhere else. But I would say most of the time that's not the case.
Yeah, and then something, as we've developed bundles over the years, and we've been working with these the minimum order thresholds and the free delivery threshold, something you do have to be careful about. It's an opportunity to lose margin or gain margin is how you price your bundles, Brooks, in relationship to where your minimum order thresholds are. For example, if a minimum order threshold is $75, I would really want to avoid putting out a bundle discount for a $75 box, because that means someone could go ahead and get that discount and meet the minimum order threshold, and do that with a bundle that you've already offered a discount on. I would much prefer to either go over or under, so that someone has to add some a la carte items to meet that minimum threshold. And the same thing with the free delivery threshold. Just putting a bundle price tag right at your minimum thresholds is not a good merchandising strategy. You want someone to have to meet that with higher margin items like a la carte items added to your bundle.
Yeah, again, this just takes some thinking. Again, you're just trying to incentivize the behavior that you want. If you're going to give the discount, make sure it's for exactly the behavior that you want. That's going to, again, the customer gets more, but also you were able to reduce the cost. It's sometimes people feel weird and sometimes icky about like doing this type of work, merchandising, finding products that have higher perceived value. But what you're doing is you're engineering now a buying process that takes some costs out of it for everybody. That benefits you, that obviously benefits your customer.
Yeah. Yep. We can move on. Number 4, Brooks, is just looking at those direct costs that we went over at the beginning of this episode and saying, how can we leverage those better? How can we lower the cost of those? So common examples for us has been our ability to purchase packaging in bulk and just get the packaging costs down. Dry ice has been a big one. And part of that is with scale. So what's great about but packaging, you can buy that in bulk, and you need to hang on to it longer. You do have that cash tied up, but it can make a significant difference on your model to do that.
This is obviously an opportunity that comes with a scale. It's why we put a lot of value in just getting the business stuff right, so you can have the ability to scale, because there's a lot of opportunity here. If more farms figure that out, you can serve your customers better. You can serve more consumers. Which is great. But a lot of times, too, you can be surprised at what economies of scales you can actually capture right now. I think there's a lot of limited thinking to that. I mean, one example is not even economies of scale, but just certain things that you can do when you're small that, a lot of times people can't feel like they can't do. Like getting into shipping. Some people feel like I don't have the buying power to buy packaging and dry ice and all that stuff. But there are ways to do regional shipping at a small scale, completely from scratch, no volume at all. So sometimes it takes just getting creative to capture a little bit of those economies of scale, and you can usually do it earlier than you think.
Yeah, a lot of limiting beliefs here. You really need to lean into challenging limiting beliefs on some of these items. Just negotiating our shipping rates. We've always been able to negotiate those lower than what we thought we'd be able to when you really put some focus into it.
So let's go to number 5, which in my opinion is it's the hardest one to do, but the easiest to implement. So share what's number 5.
This is just simply increasing prices. This is where it's really, really important to have a strong conviction about the margin that your farm and your business and your family needs in order to be sustainable, to run a sustainable business, because you owe it to your customers to be in business. They're supporting you. They want to see you in business year after year. And so you owe it to them to do the work of putting a goal together of where your margin needs to be, and then reflecting that in your price, especially after you've done all the due diligence of. That's why I always bring this one up last, because you want to do all of your due diligence, looking at running your business and stewarding your business the best you can, and getting the most margin with your resources that you have. And after that, you do need to know where your margin goal needs to be, and if you're not there, you need to increase your price.
Yeah, this one is just one that ends up creating the capability to. You can see how all these kind of work together, because in a backdoor way, once you have focus on the first 4, then you move to number 5. That allows you to now have, more margin available to put towards growth, that way you get scale faster. You can get into some, situations where you've got more buying power to reduce your direct cost. So these just get better with time. But again, as we go through all 5, you can see how what we listed off, yes, this takes work to implement, but almost all of it are things that you do once and you get into place. You increase AOV by putting a free delivery threshold in place and an order minimum. You do that once, and now you're capturing more margin on every single order with every box that goes out the door. Same thing when it comes to merchandising bundles and getting higher perceived SKUs in place. You got to work with your processor to get those things back and on the farm, but pretty much after that, you've got higher margin items now available to your customers to sell. So, and increasing your price. That's why I say this is the easiest one to implement, and something that people put off the longest, and sometimes rightfully so. Go to the first 4 first. But it's the easiest one that once you have the courage to implement it, that is just paying returns immediately after this step is taken.
Yeah. Yep. It's something that It's something you won't do unless you know, because part of the problem is, Brooks, well, what should my price be? And you don't want to look to your competitors to look at their prices.
Yeah.
You need to look no further than what your margin goals and your goals for your business are, and that needs to drive where your price ends up.
Cool. All right, well, let's land this plane. Hopefully you've enjoyed kind of just, and maybe we sparked a few ideas of at least something that you haven't thought of before that sounds easy to implement. I would encourage you to find the thing out of everything we listed through here that seems like it's going to require the least amount of per unit effort from you to get the highest return. Go implement that as soon as possible. You can take action on that this week, next week. But Blaine, let's wrap this up. What's at stake if we don't focus time and attention and bandwidth here at increasing margin?
Well, I would say that, especially if you have goals and you want and need to grow your business, or you're just a growth-minded farm and business and individual, not getting this right will absolutely undermine everything else that you're doing. And again, I'll go back to unclear margin goals will always lead to a weak price conviction. And when you have a weak price conviction, it's always going to lead to the next problem, which is lower margins. Lower margins lead to a scarcity of overheads. And when you have a scarcity of overheads, it's almost impossible to invest in those growth opportunities moving forward. So.
Yeah. No, I've interacted with folks before, and actually we started shipping way later than we should have, just because we had limiting beliefs about, we can't do that until we reach a certain scale, or I've talked to people who would spend the upfront cost to go buy the packaging and get a pallet of insulated liners and gel packs at the farm, because if you do that, that's really, I would say, the kind of the minimum purchase amount that you should start with to have an economic situation. But that obviously costs something, right? And if you're stuck in this scarcity mindset where you don't have a lot of margin left over to invest in opportunities like that, but that's like one of the things that if you're in this direct marketing journey, you can do that just opens up your farm to. It's one of the easiest things to do, to open up your farm to just a wider customer base versus going to farmers markets and selling wholesale. So hopefully you learned something. We encourage you to take action. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to head over to foodchainwars.com and subscribe. It also would mean the world to us if you left us a review. That's probably the best way to support us, just kind of unpacking what we're learning through this journey. So head over to foodchains.com and let us know your feedback with a quick review. Thanks for watching.